Well, welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest and I live here in Austin, Texas. I've had the gift of recovery since December the 27th of 1972. Very grateful for that and to all the folks who helped me all along the way. If you are new to the podcast, we try to go a little bit deeper into the history, the philosophy, the psychology, and the spirituality of 12-step recovery. If you could do us a favor and hit the like button and subscribe and all that good stuff, jump up and down 3 times, and then we're off and running. We're starting a new series, the subject is men and their emotional lives. Not a great strong point for me. I mean, my emotional life is very active. With my guest, we were trying to get started on this. We're using some new recording stuff. It's not easy, and I revert back to being a 6-year-old sometimes. So she guided me through that very, very calmly. So I definitely have the right guest. So here we are, and we're ready to go. So my guest is Laura Swann. I've known Laura for a good number of years, and she holds a master's degree in education and is also a licensed chemical dependency counselor. She teaches at several colleges and universities here in the Austin area. And in addition, she is trained and certified in treating trauma. Mine hasn't reached that stage yet, but hang on. And she does this through EMDR. That's the I thing. We may talk about that a little bit. Also certified as a Daring Way facilitator. That's a very new popular method of therapy developed by another well-known Texan therapist, Brene Brown. So welcome, Laura. Good to have you here with us.
Thank you so much, Bill, for having me. I can so relate to your description of getting all flustered, and it's easy when you're on the other side to stay calm and guide someone through. But when it's me, I don't necessarily always react that way. So,
Well, that's why I became a counselor. It's like I've got a pretty good poker face. People look at me. Boy, you're so calm. You should see what's going on inside. So I've always been kind of interested in techniques and things. I'm 53 some odd years, I guess it is, sober, or at least without a drink. And I think I'm getting there. I think I'm finally getting closer, and it's that there are two centers. There are two centers of consciousness. This is what I'm kind of coming to, and that there's the ego center, which can be quite immature and take on more than it should. And Jung talks about another center, the greater personality that also resides within us. And I just finished a series with the work of Thomas Kelly. He talks about a different center too. AA and 12-step talks about the great reality that lives within inside. I think they're all saying the same thing, that if we can learn to kind of come from this center and be more in right relationship with this center, then it is possible to be calm and collected and mature, when you're dealing with things that bring about conflict. So maybe we get into that a little bit later. But I want to begin with your own story, how you came to 12-step recovery. Laura is the author of a new book. It is titled Men and Emotions. It is a thing. We're going to go through the book. But before we do that, tell me a little bit about your own story, early family life. And you say that alcoholism was pretty prevalent there.
well, alcoholism was definitely very prominent in my family, and I think it was a generational thing, all of not only my family, but relatives. And, it's just a real common thing that you organize and centered events around alcohol and parties and those type of things. My dad was a very heavy drinker along with his siblings. My mom was alcoholic, and her alcoholism really got pretty severe when I was in junior high, and that's when the family really started falling apart more and more. A lot of unpredictability, a lot of chaos, a lot of fighting. Kind of never knew what was, when the other shoe was going to drop. So that was pretty difficult during that time. I left thinking, like most of us do, that, maybe their alcoholism, or at the time, honestly, Bill, I didn't even know that that was going. I mean, it's
Right.
going
Yeah.
on, but it's normal. It's normal for
Right.
you. It's normal for me because it was the only thing I had really ever experienced. And all my relatives. I bring up the relatives because really my culture was very much centered around that. I just didn't know any different. I remember, this is kind of a funny little story. When I left for college my first year, I ended up with this roommate, and at the time, I had no idea, but her father had been in AA for over 7 years,
Wow.
and she had kind of grown up in Alateen. And I didn't know that about her, but I saw little hints here and there, and she had given me a couple affirmation books. And I remember her sharing with me one time, your mom might be a really heavy drinker. And I really didn't think much about it, but she had invited me home one weekend to go home with her. And we're all sitting around the table. This is a Catholic family, 6 children. Dad's now in recovery. And I remember all sitting around the table. And for me, I felt so incredibly uncomfortable with that because that was not how family dinners went at my house. And he's asking me all of these questions like, oh, how do you like rooming with Tina? And how's this? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I was so uncomfortable. I just wanted to get a little TV tray and a tuna fish sandwich and watch my TV show because that's kind of what I knew. And it wasn't until years later that I realized how healthy and how recovered this family was
Yeah.
from his disease of alcoholism. So I definitely had lots of alcoholism. The fitting in thing with my family, I think a lot of that came from, I had an older sister that was very accomplished. She was a national swimmer. She was very smart. Teachers loved her. And I came along, and of course, I have dyslexia. I have some other learning disabilities. I have some vision problems. And I think I was a really difficult child for my mom.
Mm.
I just don't think she was skilled or equipped. There were lots of little things that made me feel different than her. And then my little sister was not a troublemaker. She was very compliant, very whatever. I was super curious. I was incredibly insensitive. I was incredibly sensitive. I just was very different than most of my family. I asked lots of questions.
Yeah.
So I think that was the biggest piece of not fitting in is, I kind of had these 2 siblings that looked a certain way, and they connected and chill and with my mom more, and I didn't. I just always felt like a bit of an outside.
Yeah, I can relate to that, and I'm sure many people listening to this can relate to that. Uh,
Yeah.
I was doing acid with my sister many, many, many years ago, and she's high and she's describing me. Well, what am I like? I said, well, Bill, I see all these little round holes out there, and then I see you, a square peg, going from hole to hole to hole. I said, Donna, that's beautiful. That's probably the best
Oh,
description anybody ever gave for of me. So it's not fitting in, and the sensitivity is another
yeah.
thing. Sometimes people will say alcoholics are not sensitive. It's not been my experience. Certainly
Well,
some are, but if anything, oftentimes we're more sensitive, super sensitive.
and I think that's such a great point you bring up because it's the book, right? I think
Yeah.
we are very sensitive. but I think that those emotions are squashed. At least in my family, in my experience, they're squashed.
Right.
And it's not until recovery that we have the opportunity. We don't always take advantage. Lots of people don't take advantage of that opportunity, but to gain emotional sobriety is what you were talking about. It's the shovel, it's the digging in a little deeper, because just getting sober, in my experience, you know, that was very different than this emotional sobriety and learning to live life on
Right.
life's terms.
Yes. Early training was living life on our terms, and
Absolutely.
and it just didn't work, and so you hit a crisis point of some kind or another. You say at 20 years old, you found yourself pregnant, and you didn't have much emotional support, maybe especially coming from your mom.
Yeah, that was a really difficult and I say dark time. You know, loved I loved being pregnant. I loved having a daughter, but the what I've learned today is, and this is so thick in the research, that when we go through a really difficult time, the outcome is greatly influenced by the amount of support that we had. And so when I got pregnant, I was in Texas. All of my family was in Florida. I didn't have a huge community in Texas, but I did
Hmm.
have a small. I was an athlete, and so I had a little bit of a community at the college that I was at. But once I got pregnant, it was like, I don't think it was an intentional, oh my God, we got to disown her, like
Yeah.
maybe my family, but their lives just became really different than mine. And so that community within my college, they went on and kept doing the same thing, and mine's just completely 180.
Yeah.
My
Right. You're a triathlete. Was is that
Well,
correct?
in college, I was a springboard diver, and
Springboard.
so
Tough to do
yes,
when you're pregnant, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
it was not an easy time.
Yeah.
And when I finally told my mom, I just don't think she could handle it. My mom, like I talk about in the book, everything needed to be wrapped up in a pretty bow, and
Mm,
her
right.
okayness was based on how the family presented. And if the family presented as achieved and smart, that was the other piece about not fitting in. I think back then in that generation, the way that children were kind of viewed, you had a smart kid or you had a dumb kid. Not that we use that language anymore, a dumb kid, but back there in the 60s, absolutely was. And I think I was just labeled that from early on, and it made life very challenging. So, but my mom really struggled with the pregnancy, and like I talk about in the book, in her eyes, the most effective discipline was the silent treatment. We would have days of silent treatment at times, but this pregnancy, she didn't talk to me for 14, 15 months. And I was in Texas by myself. And oh man, I navigated that the best I could, but it was messy. It was sloppy. It would have been easier with some support to know what I was doing.
Yeah. I'd like to do a little aside here. You're a therapist. And, one of the things I run into a lot is therapists being trained to withhold their own story from their
Mm,
patients.
mm.
Don't self-disclose. And yet the people who helped me most in my life, if they had not self-disclosed, I don't know that they ever could have gotten through the walls that I had set up around me. They became vulnerable first.
Oh, amen. Amen.
Yeah.
It's, we talk about that a lot when I'm teaching a class, whether
Hmm.
it's group therapy or SUD, substance use dependence
Right.
therapy or whatever. Um, and we talk about the level of disclosure.
Yes.
In my own personal practice, I really gauge the client. I mean, some clients I disclose a lot more, than
Right.
others. And some clients will even ask me, you know, um, what is your experience? Or I know you've shared a tiny bit about being in recovery. Can you tell me about that? Or was
Right.
that difficult for you? Or so, and when they ask, I definitely disclose, but I try not to make the session about me because
That's
this,
always the danger.
yeah,
That's that's the other side of it. Right. That's right.
absolutely. But it's
Yeah.
important. And, in this book, the first paragraph I talk about when I was writing the book, I had no intention of sharing my own personal story about my the emotional
Mm-hmm.
challenges in my
Yep.
life. And I remember waking up, and I really do think that was a God intervention or a God kind of saying, "All right, Laura." Um, and I remember sitting up in bed one night, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, I'm asking all of these men to share really vulnerable and personal things, and this book is going to be pretty vulnerable and personable, but I'm not gonna do that." And something didn't
Right.
feel right about that, but then
Right.
there's part of
Yeah.
me too. There was part of me, Bill, that was like, "Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I'm good with that."
Yeah.
And
Mother would have been
yeah,
happy with that response.
oh, absolutely. Mine too. Mine too.
Hmm.
Um, but it continued to kind of haunt me, and it continued to come up. And I thought, "I'm okay, Laura. Just go write it, and then you decide whether you want to put it in there or not." Um, so I thought it was a really important piece, and I've had numerous people who have read the book. And one experience, this is so interesting, and there's a comment about this on Facebook on the book, the feedback. A therapist was working with this gentleman, and she was using the book, and he came in and he said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this book came into my life at this time." And she asked him, she said, what are you connecting to so much? And what's really, and he said, "Well, so far, mostly I've connected to the author's story."
Hmm.
And I thought, oh my gosh, here I wasn't even going to put anything in there. But like you said earlier, your therapist, as they shared and disclosed, you connected with them,
Right.
and it gave you the ability to take down your,
And I think that, addiction is an illness of disconnection.
amen, yes.
I wind up, the only safe thing in my life was the bottle, and then that turned on me, and then where do you go? And that's where somebody steps in, and it can be the darndest thing who breaks that wall, allows you to at least peep over it and see the other side. And that's how it starts.
Yeah.
That's how it starts.
That's exactly how it started for me. I mean, like I shared the roommate in college, little
Yeah,
little peephole, just a
right.
little bit. And then, I had a little bit more and a little bit more. And these were just these little people in my life until finally the dam broke open.
Yes,
And I really had to take, like you said, it was time to get the shovel and take a deeper look within myself, my own relationship with substances, my
right,
relationship with my emotional self, my relationships with other people.
right.
I really had to take a deep look at that because looking back on it now, and at the time, I don't think we realized it, but I was not showing up very well. And I really did not know how to do that.
Right. Sure, that's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mention in the book that you got help from AA, from Al-Anon, and from ACA, as well as through therapy. I wonder if you could touch on each one of those, uh, because I think a full recovery benefits from having addressed each one of those areas.
Oh, I would love to touch on that because honestly, if the first probably 5 years, lifesaver.
Yeah.
lifesaver. I mean, it was just such a huge deal to me. It all was kind of, they all kind of coincided with each other. I was thinking about this, and I've thought about it over the 30 plus years of my recovery. Kind of which came first, the therapy or the meetings or the people in the
Right.
recovery. But I do remember being in therapy, and I hit, well, let me back up just a second. I had met a friend who was a nurse and worked with people in recovery, and she recommended this therapist because at that point in my life, it was kind of, the hole was getting deeper and I didn't have a shovel.
Yeah.
And so I really was, and she said, Laura, just, try therapy. So I went to therapy and she suggested that I go to AA and Al-Anon, ACOA. There was this group that, and I should try some of the meetings. And I started going at Bill, and it was just amazing. I mean, it just clicked for me. I started to understand. I remember the very first meeting I went to was a women's meeting. There was a woman in there who ended up being my sponsor for many years, who just told my story. I was like, oh my gosh, you could be my sister. And I just remember crying. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one that has experienced that. And, they come around, and I remember sitting there and they asked me a question, and the first probably 2 or 3 times I couldn't answer. I just kind of, I'm okay. But until I really kind of put a lot of pieces together, um, those meetings were pretty emotional for me the first
Hmm.
probably month or so, because golly, it was the first time in my life that I realized I wasn't crazy, that there were other people like me. I didn't have I had to take responsibility for myself, but I didn't have to shame myself.
Hmm. Well
And
put.
yes, and there's a huge difference between those two. It was huge. And I remember those first, especially the first probably 2 or 3 years. I mean, there were weeks that I went to, I don't know, 7, 8 meetings, sometimes several meetings in a day. And I was at Texas Tech at that time, and being on campus, it was great because there were lots of meetings that I could hit during the day that, made it easy, accessible for me.
I went to Texas Tech, met a couple of professors up there. Both of them were working in the trauma area. And they invited me to come to, if I remember correctly, this is 30 plus years ago, maybe 40, I don't know. But it was like, come on a Thursday night, because was it Thursday, that we have a group meeting of all of the different 12-step programs on campus. And there must have been like 300 people, and people were getting chips for AA, for NA, for CA, for ACA, and it was wonderful.
Oh, that meeting's so powerful. It's called Celebration of Recovery.
Yeah,
And
not to be confused with the church thing.
that's right, right. That, yeah, it wasn't that.
No, nor the church
Um,
thing at all.
yeah, in fact, that meeting you're talking about started way before the actual Celebration of Recovery in the church, or before that became real popular.
But it was a celebration.
It
That was the
was, yeah.
very important thing. Those people were happy. They were happy, and you could feel it in the room.
I remember when I was at Tech, that meeting started about 50 people. And then we had to get a bigger room, and it went to 100. By the time I left, it was easily 150 people. And it's exciting to hear that, 300 people. I can't imagine what it is now, but um, I do think it is a testament to how prominent this disease is
Yeah.
and how many people struggle in some form of fashion, whether it's AA, Al-Anon, ACA, relationship addiction, codependency,
Eating
eating
disorders,
disorders.
sexual dysfunctions of,
Yes, yeah,
addictions rather,
gambling.
Gambling is huge now. So you wound up teaching at Texas Tech. How'd you get interested in you were in sports sciences originally? Is that correct?
Like I said, I mean, it was one of the gifts that my family always gave me. They were, um, they stressed the importance of being active. Um, and I was always involved in some sport. And by the end of junior high, high school, I was really focused on swimming and diving. And so I got really lucky in 1975. I got a scholarship to go to a school in South Florida and for springboard diving. And I went there for 2 years and then got recruited to Texas. So I came out to Texas, and that's how I ended up in Texas as a springboard diver. So I've always been involved in sports and activities. Was a triathlete for a while. Um, I love exercise, and I do feel like it's been one of my strategies that has kept me pretty sane. Um, so I got, a couple degrees in that field and was teaching in, it's called Exercise, Sports, and Sciences at Texas Tech, and ended up meeting Carl Anderson.
Yeah, I met
And
him a few times in my journeys as well.
he's such a wonderful man. And at that time, I had no connection to their Center for the Study of Addiction. I was teaching in exercise, sports, and sciences and kind of going on with my life, but I had entered the recovery world and I met Carl Anderson at a 12-step meeting. And after one of the meetings, he asked me, he said, have you ever thought about working in this field? And I thought, no, I really hadn't. And we visited and we had lunch several times and visited about what that might look like, and went back and got my, counseling degree or my counseling license so I could do that. And once I did that, he was in the midst of developing the collegiate recovery community.
Hmm. Could you talk about what that is?
Sure. A collegiate recovery community is a community, a group of students that is on campus um, at a university that are committed to sobriety and recovery. So all of these students are in recovery and they're committed to that. And it's, Texas Tech was number one, number two. There's a little bit of a battle that goes on between where they actually number one or number two, but they were very instrumental in starting. Carl was very instrumental in starting those programs. So I kind of jumped on board about the second year that they were beginning those programs and became involved. And then eventually I continued teaching in exercise sciences 50% of my appointment, and then came over to the Center for the Study of Addiction for 50. And by the time I left, I think the last 5 or 7 years, I was 75% in the study for addiction and 25 in the exercise. So yeah, and it was great. I mean, I loved that job. It was a really
Right.
good job.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Um, and maybe one of the reasons, let's dig into this one, get our shovels out a little bit. Um, I'm interested in the Oxford group, the history of the Oxford group, how that influenced AA, and their focus also was on young people, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily. Uh, and young people have that energy and that curiosity. Um, and if you can develop um, a program for them, a community is a better word, a community for them where they can fit in and not just live with slogans. I mean, to me, that's one of the problems with the AA and 12 step as it's gone along, it can become very routine, mechanical. It can lack the depth. I think the exact same thing is true of the church too. You know, it becomes what do you believe, and if you believe the right things, and that's not helpful for young people. So I think the things what you talked about earlier of putting these things together in a package, um, and that people can perhaps it's the emotional or perhaps it's the sober side, uh, but give them a package of life that is worth doing, that's going to fulfill some of the emptiness inside and give you, I mean, back to Viktor Frankl, meaning and purpose.
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
I think he was really right on with that. Give me some meaning and purpose in my life.
Right. And well, you got to think about, because I mean, AA and its origins were much older people, right?
Absolutely.
And so we're looking at these people who are 18, 19, 20, 22. And then your non-traditional students, which we always had a lot of, whether it was at Texas Tech or UT, non-traditional students that had burned a lot of bridges
Mhm.
and through their addiction or their challenges in life, and decided to come back to school once they got sober and were able to manage school.
Right.
But you're right, Bill. I mean, you have to meet people in the age appropriateness, right? I mean, you're not going to take something that is applicable to these, 30, 40, 50, 60-year olds or whatever and apply it to an 18-year-old and expect them to latch onto that.
Right. That's right. That's right. Uh, so, I mean, we have to be more creative in how we approach younger people today and make it appealing to them. And community is a part of it. Uh, of course, you can make it a cult too. So that's you have to be very careful of that. You know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I saw that at UT, when I left Texas Tech and my husband and I moved to Austin. Carl Anderson was for after me for about 2 years. He said, UT doesn't have a collegiate recovery. You need to start one there. You need to start one there. And long story short, after about 2 years of negotiating meetings and et cetera, they finally took the bait and we started a CRC at University of Texas. And
Right.
one is the director of that program for many years. One of the things that I did, because I had that experience at Texas Tech and like what we just talked about, making it age appropriate, I mean, the activities were very aligned. Like they would still tailgate, they would just have sober tailgating. They would go to football games, but they would go in with their community and they would all be
Right.
sober and still have a great time. Um, Go camping and have weekends where they just spent the entire weekend, down on the Guadalupe River
Hmm.
but they would do these things that young people really enjoy doing.
Right.
And within that program, every year or semester, I would have kind of an activities coordinator, and that person was in charge, along with other people in the program, to create these age appropriate, because they knew better than I, what the students were going to be interested in.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. How do you have fun in sobriety? And that was one of the things that really troubled me. I mean, it was like, oh, when I was 27 when I got sober. Oh my God! Well, the fun is gone. It's just gone.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah, yeah. It is I mean, it is a change learning. It's a whole new way of life, whether you're 27, 37, or 18.
Right.
It's still, I mean, I have many clients that are in their 30s and their social life has been centered around
It's all. That's
going,
it. That's it.
yeah,
Yeah.
going out after work and having drinks or having drinks during work, or,
Right. And
these
then the hell with work.
that's right. Or, which I just don't understand this, but these companies who have these little, um, lounges where you can come and have a glass of wine and a beer during the workday. And
Yeah.
I just don't know how appropriate that is.
Right. It's a dangerous drug. We know that now.
Oh, absolutely.
Some of
Yeah.
us know that anyway.
Oh, and
It's,
others are finding out.
they're finding out the hard way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You say in your book that you worked primarily with women in your earlier days. Then slowly, gradually, it transitioned to an interest in working with men. You credit maybe some of that, maybe perhaps unconsciously, with your father. Talk about your dad, and then talk about how you got interested in men's issues.
Oh gosh, my dad. My dad, loved my dad. It was always like we were trying to connect, but neither one of us knew how. And I truly believe to this day that he shared some of the struggles that I've shared in the learning arena, but he was also this brilliant genius mathematician that was a rocket scientist, literally. I mean, he
With
worked,
NASA, he was with NASA.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
And so he had this world that, he could go and excel in. But later, I remember when he passed away, I had some boxes of his, stuff, and I found some report cards and some other things that he had written. And I can't say whether he was dyslexic or not, but boy, I'll tell you, there were some, like in all of his statistics and math and all of that, he'd be A, and then reading, English, those type of things, he was D, C, and he repeated courses numerous
Wow.
times. So something was going on there.
Yeah.
Um, and again, I don't think back then, they really even knew that that existed, but he was a beautiful man and he showed up for me in times that nobody else in my family did.
Nice.
So I have a very, very warm place um, for him in my heart. As far as working with men, um, it wasn't my intention, like you said, very, very unconscious. And I tell this story in the book, and thank goodness for this client because at that time my practice was probably 80+% female. And I remember I got this referral um, from a treatment center and said, "Hey, can you work with this man?" And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, another man probably coerced into therapy and doesn't want to be here. And his wife has made him go, or this treatment center is making him go. And I just really had a negative attitude about working with men, which was not good on my part as a therapist and unbeknownst to me for sure. And I started working with him, and he was just the most beautiful man. He just leaned into and took that shovel and dug. He was so curious about his emotions and how his emotions, both from his past life and current life, affected him. And he just taught me so much about men. And what I began to realize, and I began to become more open to the fact that men really do want to learn more about their emotions. They've just had these stereotypes and these blocks and these challenges that have prevented them to be able to do that. And so from there, my practice, I became a lot more open and I just got more referrals of men.
Mm.
And then I think I got referrals from the men I was seeing.
Right.
They were like, "Oh yeah, go to her. She's good
Yeah,
with
yeah.
men."
Right.
I don't really know how the whole thing happened. Maybe it was a God thing,
Sure.
who knows? But I mean, today that has completely flip-flopped, and majority of my clients are men. And then I do that men's group on Wednesday night, and so I have a lot of men in my practice, and I love working with men.
What was your idea behind the book? What did you want to accomplish there?
Well, that really came out of COVID. No, you know
Well,
how
my
that.
podcast and stuff came out of
I
COVID,
know.
you know? It's
I know. I know.
yeah.
I was doing the men's group, and we were all online. And that's an interesting thing in itself. But we were online, and I began thinking about, I was watching these men who were getting vulnerable and really, it was like they had found this place, this safe place to really talk about some of the difficult things in their life. And all of the men in the men's group, really, honestly, they're high functioning men. They have recovery, they're solid, but they still deal with life, right? We all deal with life.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Yeah.
because our recovery's good or, our job is good doesn't mean we don't deal with difficult things in life. It's just part of
Mm-hmm.
it. And so I'm working with these men, and I'm thinking, golly, the challenges that men have had, how how can I already add to what's happening with this opening of men being able to seek therapy, being able to be more emotional beings, understanding the emotional health and mental health? How could I contribute to that? And I just thought about it and prayed about it a lot, and lots of ideas came to mind, but I thought men need to hear from other men that this is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Men need to hear from, because I thought about that first experience and that first meeting that I sat in and hearing from other women about
Yeah, right.
that and how that changed my life. And I thought they need to hear from other men. So I began kind of pondering that idea and how could I accomplish that. Um, the whole goal of the book, honestly, is to help other men. That's it. I mean, or women too. To help women, because the first part of the book can apply to anybody. It's just about emotions,
Emotions, correct.
right? And then the second half of the book was all the stories that the men submitted. So, yeah,
It's kind of like the big book. If it doesn't have the stories, it's all theoretical.
absolutely. And that's such a good point you bring up, because I remember thinking about this when I'm writing. You asked, one of the questions you were asking me was kind of, how did I organize or get ready for the book? And one of my goals was I really wanted to write it in um, layman's terms. I didn't want to go off therapy on it. I didn't want to go technical. I didn't want to go theoretical. I didn't want to go super heavy in the research. I think people in recovery, or anybody that picks up this book, don't want to read that. I mean, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about that, but I believe that I wanted to make it as down to earth as I could, and to really put it in a language that I use when I work with my client.
Yeah, and we're gonna dive in next episode a lot more deeply into the book. But I found it intriguing at the end of the opening chapter. You talk about the difference between emotions and feelings. It was almost like a teaser to get you going into the deeper parts there. Could you talk a little bit about that? I found that fascinating, and I don't know that it's popularly understood that way.
Right.
So go for it. Go for it.
Okay.
Feelings and emotions.
I agree with you. And it's funny that you bring that up, because I debated going back and forth whether I wanted to include that in the book or not. And I called probably 6 of my friends that are very seasoned therapists. I said, what do you think about this? Should I include it? Should I not? And kind of, surveyed the feel. And eventually I thought, yeah, I want to put that in there, because it is something that in my practice I do work with some. So the difference between the two, emotions are the sensations in the body. When we have an emotion, it is like let's say we have a fight or flight
Right.
situation, norepinephrine, epinephrine, there's cortisol, lots of chemicals are being released into the body. Those chemicals cause a physical reaction in our body. You might feel a racing of the heart. You might start pitting. You might, feel nauseous. Lots of reactions. So that physical are the emotions and the chemicals. The feelings are the how we describe that. So I feel anxious. I feel, nauseous. It's how we just, I feel scared. I feel worried. So the feelings describe what's happening.
Mm.
And a good way to think about this is, let's say you got two people and they're going on a hike. And this is definitely kind of a bit of an extreme in terms of emotions, but they're going on a hike. And you got one very, very experienced hiker, and you got one that's kind of a Nubian. And all of a sudden, they turn the corner, they encounter a bear. The experienced hiker has been on hundreds of hikes. He's seen bears, he's seen other critters, and he pulls out his pepper spray, and he'll probably have a physical reaction.
Right.
And those chemicals will be released, but very different than the person who is the Nubian.
Right.
Those chemicals are going to be far greater for him. The fight or flight is going to be far greater for him. Maybe he doesn't have pepper spray. He's never experienced it before. So his brain is automatically going to go most likely more panic.
The chemical's going to go kind of wash over him, tsunami-like.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the importance about this in therapy is that in therapy, our past experiences, you described it earlier, trauma, our past experience have great effect on our present day.
Right.
And so I can have a present day experience and my emotions to that present day, just like the two hikers.
Right.
If it's combined with these past experiences of trauma, will be piled onto my present day, making the reaction much greater than just what might have been in present day. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. When I get overwhelmed with stuff like that, I ask myself the question, how old am I right now? And oftentimes I'm 6 years old, I'm 5 years old, I'm back in a traumatic situation, which my family of origin was. I mean, I was getting beaten and locked in closets and stuff like that,
Yeah,
at some level stays with me, and
absolutely.
yeah, and it's like, and I like what the body thinks. So my body is telling me something, it's going crazy, and my mind that is sober 50 some odd years and all this and spiritually advanced. My God. So, well, you shouldn't be feeling it. Well, yes, you should. Yes, you should. And to allow myself, give myself, doesn't mean I act on it. I shouldn't act on those, but I do have to acknowledge that they're there.
The beauty of that, Bill, though, the beauty of that is your experience in recovery and your own emotional work has taken you to this place to be able to pause.
Right.
Pause when agitated, right? I mean, this is
some real wisdom in that book.
There is some real wisdom.
Yeah.
But you pause and you say, how old am I? And you take a deep breath and you calm the body.
Yeah.
You take a deep breath, and that's healing. Right. Whereas if you had no recovery, you might react like I talk about in the book. I used to spew, and spewing.
I love that word, spew.
Man,
Spewers Anonymous. How did nobody develop that one?
I'll tell you. Well, it was a good description for me because, man, I could come unhinged. And that's the part I was sharing with earlier. I didn't like how I was showing up. I always felt so um, regretful of the
Yeah.
spew.
Right.
But when we do our work, like today, I
Hmm.
don't spew very often anymore.
Right.
I don't. I mean, full disclosure, I did have one big spew during COVID. I did. It
Only
was,
one. Should have called me,
well,
Laura.
oh my gosh. And my poor husband, I kind of spewed on him and he was like,
Yeah.
whoa, I'm not seeing this. But
Right.
it is that work that we do and the healing of the trauma when we make it much softer and
Right.
not so big,
Hmm.
it no longer hijacks us.
Yeah.
And we're able to pause and stay more in that. I talk about it in the book, kind of that wise mind where it's a combination of accepting the feelings like you did. Okay, at first you're judging the feelings. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't feel this way. And then you're
Right.
like, well, no, it's okay. I'm feeling this way. Of course I should. And then you're, so you're acknowledging the feelings, but at the same time, you're experiencing both the feelings and staying in the cognitive or the cerebral part of your mind so you can react in a way that is more consistent with your values.
That's right. And this is where I find it helpful to read Jungians and mystics who talk about these two centers of consciousness.
Okay.
I find that very helpful. That where the big book says the great reality is within, uh, I think they're spot on. But I don't think it's within our livers. I don't think it's in the kidneys. I think it's in the depths of the mind.
Yeah.
And
Um,
and and that's why the deeper work of recovery is so very important. If recovery were just about not drinking, I don't know that I'd stick around.
I know. Or, and I don't want to speak for everybody because goodness, I've had so many clients. I mean, recovery for me, making a commitment not to drink anymore, not to smoke pot or to do any mind altering was much easier for me
Yeah.
than all of this stuff. I
And a
mean,
necessary component of the other stuff.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. The difference is that, and the reason we want to kind of be aware of that, and again, don't get hung up on it. Feelings and
Yeah.
emotions are, they
Yeah.
they're both pictures, and one's a relief picture, or it's not even a relief. They both, they're both in the game.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's important in terms of um, when we talk about emotion regulation, because we have to learn how to manage our emotions, right? I mean, I could get really, really angry about something at work, but it's not the place to
Right.
to um, process that and whatever. I need to take that somewhere else and then come back and have a healthy discussion. So we have to learn emotion regulation and knowing the difference between feelings and emotions and not getting hijacked helps us a ton.
Well, we're going to dig into this next episode. You list 9 principles that people need to be aware of, can be helpful, kind of like the 12 steps.
Yep.
Here they are. Here's what's going on here, and I want you to walk us through each one, and maybe dive into Brene Brown a little bit. Not next time, but time after that. What is she about? Why is she being popular? What is that daring way thing about? So I'd like our listeners to be introduced to some of that. So if you're game for that, it'd be really helpful.
Sure.
Yeah, put a link to Laura's book in the show notes. Encourage you to order a copy from Amazon. Laura has also said it's okay to put an email address for her in the show notes. So if you'd like to get in touch with her, drop her a note. She'd love to hear from you. I always like hearing from people.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, people put in the comments, but I got share with you guys. I don't read the comments. I don't. It's like, but I do read emails. So if you want to drop an email to me, you can do it at twowayprayer, TWO, twowayprayer@gmail.com. I do like to hear from folks. So, Laura, can't thank you enough. Glad we worked through the demons in
You did great, Bill.
the technical stuff that I am way out of my league doing these podcasts, but it hasn't stopped me so far. We do overcome them, so that's
That's
pretty good.
right. Well, thank
Okay,
you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation and look forward to our next one.
me too, me too. And thank you guys for listening. Hope it was helpful. If it was, let a friend know, and please keep coming back.